We live in a time of information overload. We scroll, we consume, we perform. But despite all this knowledge, we still don't understand ourselves. And that's dangerous. Have you ever wondered why you keep falling into the same toxic patterns? Why you attract the same people, sabotage the same opportunities, or feel a strange emptiness, even when life seems fine? What if I told you that you are not who you think you are? That beneath your goals, your fears, your confidence, there's another force shaping your life. A force you didn't choose, a force you can't see. This isn't philosophy. It's not self-help. This is psychology. And if there's one man who uncovered the truth behind it all, it's Carl Gustav Jung. You see, Jung didn't just study the mind. He studied the shadows behind it. The parts of you that you've repressed, the traumas your conscious mind refuses to see, the patterns you inherited without knowing it. Until you face these invisible forces, you will never be free. You'll call your pain bad luck. You'll call your cycles normal. You'll blame the world, never realizing that the real puppeteer is your own unconscious. This video is not about facts or history. It's a mirror. And once you see what Jung saw, once you realize that the dream you had, the trigger you felt, or the pattern you repeat is not random, but symbolic, you'll never see yourself the same way again. So take a breath, get honest, and prepare to meet the version of yourself that's been waiting behind the noise. Because here at Psychology Insights, we don't just talk about psychology. We reveal the truths that set you free. And this might be the most important one yet. Most people think psychology is about fixing what's broken, treating symptoms, offering coping tools, helping people function in society. But Carl Jung wasn't interested in mere adjustment. He was interested in awakening. Born in Switzerland in 1875, Jung grew up surrounded by religious rituals, mystical tension, and a silence that left a permanent imprint on his soul. Even as a boy, he sensed that life carried meanings deeper than language, found in dreams, myths, symbols. It's no surprise, then, that he became the most brilliant student of Sigmund Freud. But just as important, he had the courage to break away. Freud believed human behavior was driven mostly by repressed sexuality. Jung disagreed. He believed we suffer not just because of childhood trauma, but because we've lost connection with the soul. Where Freud looked to the past, Jung looked into something older, deeper, the collective past, the symbols, stories, and archetypes that still live inside us. And that philosophical split would change the course of psychology forever. From that rupture came something revolutionary: analytical psychology. Jung's goal wasn't to eliminate symptoms, it was to restore meaning. He didn't see the mind as a machine to be repaired, but as a living ecosystem, always balancing opposites, light and dark, logic and emotion, masculine and feminine. For Jung, suffering wasn't a malfunction. It was a message, a signal, a call to grow. As he wrote, neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. In other words, the pain we avoid becomes illness. The pain we face becomes growth. Jung believed that what we repress within ourselves doesn't disappear, it becomes the shadow. And the shadow, if ignored, doesn't go silent. It sabotages, quietly, from within. His work wasn't about pretending to be healed. It was about integration, learning to see the rejected parts of ourselves not as flaws, but as messengers. Because for Jung, the real danger isn't in suffering, it's in unconsciousness. And in a world that rewards distraction, image, and perfection, that warning is more urgent than ever. We like to believe that what happens in our minds belongs solely to us, that our fears are personal, that our dreams arise from childhood, culture, or memory. But Jung saw something deeper, something older. He proposed that beneath the personal unconscious lies a vast, invisible layer of the psyche, the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of ancient images, instincts, and emotional blueprints inherited from all of humanity. Think of your conscious mind as a small island, Everything you know, your memories, beliefs, traumas, lives there. But beneath that island is a deep ocean, dark and silent. That ocean is not metaphor. It is psychic reality. It holds patterns far older than your biography. Jung called these patterns archetypes, universal structures of meaning that shape how we think, feel, and act. They appear in myths, religions, art, and most vividly, in dreams. For example, when you dream of being chased by a shadowy figure, that's not just anxiety. It may be the archetype of the pursuer, echoing humanity's age-old fear of what we run from within. When you see yourself climbing an endless staircase, you're not just having a surreal dream. You may be living out the hero's journey, striving toward growth. And these patterns aren't just symbolic, they're active. You don't summon them, they summon you. That's why you feel a sudden ache when watching a movie about abandonment. It activates the orphan within you. That's why you're drawn to stories of sacrifice and redemption. They stir the wounded healer or the martyr. These archetypes live in you, speak through you, and guide your emotions, especially when you're unaware of them. And here's the danger. The more unconscious they are, the more control they have. In today's world, this truth is more urgent than ever. We're told to be original, to brand ourselves, to perform uniqueness. But behind that curated identity, many feel quietly lost. The loneliness we feel isn't just social, it's symbolic disconnection, a rupture from the deeper language that once gave our inner lives meaning. Jung didn't offer archetypes as abstract theory. He offered them as a map, a way back to wholeness. Because when we stop listening to those ancient voices within, we lose contact with something sacred, our place in the shared story of humanity. And that story isn't passive. It dreams through us, it suffers through us, it awakens through us. So, the next time you dream of a house collapsing or flying through a dark tunnel, don't dismiss it. The unconscious is speaking, not in logic, but in symbols. It's asking you to remember something deeper than words, something older than fear. And once you begin to recognize these symbols, you don't just understand yourself, you begin to awaken. If the collective unconscious is the ocean beneath your mind, then the shadow is the part of that ocean you've refused to swim in. While the unconscious holds all that is unknown to you, memories, symbols, instincts, the shadow is more specific. It contains everything you consciously reject about yourself. Your rage, your envy, your fears, your hidden desires. It is the part of the unconscious that was once conscious, but was pushed down because it felt too shameful, too messy, or too unacceptable to be seen. And here's the truth. What you push away doesn't disappear. It waits. Have you ever said something cruel and immediately thought, "Why did I say that?" Or felt an unexpected wave of jealousy that made no sense, but clung to you for hours? That wasn't a glitch. That was your shadow speaking. The shadow isn't evil. It's the emotional landfill of your life. The parts of you had to hide to survive, to be loved, to be accepted. Over time, society, family, and culture teach you to play a role, a mask Jung called the persona. The good son, the nice girl, the strong one. And while the persona helps you fit in, it comes at a cost. You lose touch with what's real. The more you identify with the mask, the more you project the rejected parts of yourself onto others. You'll call someone arrogant, but secretly fear your own desire to be seen. You'll despise selfishness in others, while quietly craving freedom for yourself. The world becomes your shadow mirror, reflecting everything you haven't dared to claim within. And, in a culture built on performance, this divide grows. We reward emotional restraint. We praise positivity. We fear depth. But beneath the curated self is a truth that refuses to die, and that truth leaks out through anxiety, through judgment, through that quiet voice that whispers, "Something's not right." Jung warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. What you don't face, you will become. What you avoid, you will attract. And what you reject, you will be haunted by. But here's the hope. The shadow isn't here to punish you. It's here to free you. Because within your darkness lies your power, your raw honesty, your boundaries, your creativity, your fire. Integration doesn't mean acting on every dark impulse. It means acknowledging them, giving them a name, sitting with the discomfort, and reclaiming the parts of yourself that were never bad, just misunderstood. That's the beginning of individuation, the sacred journey of becoming whole. Not perfect, whole. And while the world may never see that wholeness, you will feel it, because your shadow is not your enemy. It's your teacher. After years of living through the persona, suppressing your shadow, and performing for acceptance, something inside begins to ache. A quiet emptiness emerges, one that no success, no validation, no applause seems to fill. And Carl Jung knew exactly why. He believed that most people do not live, they perform. They survive by fragmenting themselves. But what's missing isn't motivation or confidence. What's missing is individuation. Now let's be clear. Individuation is not spiritual branding. It's not about manifesting your best self or unlocking abundance through mindset hacks. Jung called it the lifelong process of becoming whole, of integrating all the parts of you that you've hidden, hated, or denied. And it's painful, because the path toward wholeness doesn't begin with light. It begins with loss, the slow unraveling of who you thought you were. The ego cracks, the image collapses, the mask slips. And in that moment of raw exposure, you're invited, not to escape, but to return to something more real. As Jung wrote, the encounter with the self is, by nature, a defeat for the ego. That's why so few ever take the path, because it demands that you stop blaming others, that you stop performing, that you stop pretending. It asks you to sit down with your fears, your contradictions, your wounds, and listen. But listen to what? To the soul. And the soul doesn't speak in logic. It speaks in symbols. That's why Jung placed such importance on dreams, not as mental leftovers, but as sacred maps. He believed the psyche reveals itself, not in words, but in images, coded messages from the unconscious, meant to guide you back to your center. Imagine this. You dream of standing in a collapsing house, walls cracking, floors sinking. You wake up shaken, but unsure why. Jung would say, the house often represents the self. Its collapse is the psyche's way of saying, this identity no longer holds. It's not destruction, it's transformation. Or maybe you keep dreaming of a forest, endlessly wandering through trees. You're not lost. You're being pulled inward, toward the unknown parts of your psyche waiting to be met. These symbols are not random. They are invitations, whispers from the deeper layers of your being, asking not for performance, but for presence. Individuation is the process of answering that call, of becoming, not someone else, but who you already are, beneath the noise, the mask, and the fear. It doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds through ruptures, breakups, breakdowns, identity crises. Each collapse is a chance to rebuild, not as the persona, but as the self. And if you dare to stay with the discomfort, if you let your dreams speak instead of dismissing them, you'll begin to understand what Jung meant when he said, who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. Because awakening is not about reaching some perfect state. It's about finally stopping the performance and coming home. We live in a world that dismisses the symbolic. Dreams are labeled random. Emotions are pathologized. Inner language is ignored. But Carl Jung saw through that dismissal. He believed that while your conscious mind sleeps, your unconscious awakens and begins to speak. Not in words, but in symbols. You may dream of falling, of losing teeth, of being chased, or walking through endless corridors. Modern culture calls this just stress, but Jung called it a message from the soul. For Jung, dreams weren't nonsense. They were the psyche's attempt to restore balance when the ego has gone too far off track. A collapsing house might reflect the breakdown of your false identity. A recurring snake might symbolize transformation, danger, or healing, depending on its mood, movement, or color. A mirror might reveal the shadow you've refused to face. These symbols aren't decorations. They are data. And more importantly, they're direction. Because the psyche is always trying to guide you back to wholeness. But to follow, you have to know how to listen. So, how do you listen? Start by paying attention to what repeats: symbols, emotions, patterns. Write down your dreams before the logic of day sweeps them away. Don't try to interpret them instantly. Just feel them. Sit with them. Ask yourself, what part of me is speaking here? What truth is trying to emerge beneath this image? Let the symbol unfold gradually, like poetry, not a puzzle. Sometimes it will take weeks. Sometimes the insight will hit you like lightning. But either way, the unconscious always responds to those who approach it with sincerity. Jung devoted his life to decoding these inner messages. Through archetypes, the hero, the shadow, the wise one, the wounded child, he revealed that we are not alone in our inner experiences. These patterns live within all of us, shaping how we love, fear, and grow. But when left unconscious, they possess us. You don't just act them out. You become them, blindly. That's why some people constantly sacrifice themselves for others, yet quietly resent it. They're trapped in the unexamined hero. Others seek attention, but never feel seen. The wounded child is crying through them, and those drawn to conflict and chaos may be living under the shadow's rule. The key is not to suppress these forces, but to recognize them, to witness them without judgment, to bring light to what has long remained in the dark. Because when you listen to your dreams, you're not escaping reality. You're returning to it at its deepest level. In today's noisy world, that kind of listening is radical and necessary. So if you've been feeling lost, fragmented, or out of sync, don't just reach for another distraction. Reach inward, because your psyche is speaking. Every night, every symbol, every silence. The only question is, will you listen? You've come this far, and maybe now, the patterns are beginning to emerge. You've seen how the shadow hides what you fear, how the collective unconscious shapes what you feel, how your dreams are not chaos, but coded messages, and how individuation is not self-improvement, but self-reclamation. But here's the thing. All of these inner forces exist within a world that is actively trying to silence them. We live in the most connected era in human history, yet people have never felt more isolated, fragmented, or quietly desperate. Modernity promised freedom, but gave us endless distraction. It promised connection, but replaced it with curated images and shallow validation. In the constant scroll of performance and comparison, one silent question haunts millions. Who am I, really? This is where Jung becomes not just relevant, but vital. Because unlike modern self-help gurus selling dopamine hacks and surface-level positivity, Jung offered something radical. Depth, meaning, soul. He didn't give you formulas to feel good. He gave you a path to become real. He didn't promise you clarity by bypassing pain. He showed you how to walk through it with your eyes open. He knew that collapse was not failure. It was invitation. And that meaning is not found in comfort, but in confrontation with the truth. He warned of exactly what we're seeing today. A society so obsessed with image that it loses the self beneath the mask. A generation medicated for anxiety, yet starving for meaning. Success stories built on burnout. Influence without identity. Self-expression without a self. And yet, the soul waits. It doesn't care about your resume, your followers, your perfectly polished persona. It cares about truth, depth, wholeness. And when you ignore that call, when you numb out, perform, pretend, your psyche doesn't stay silent. It protests through depression, through dreams, through moments that break the surface of your carefully curated life and whisper, "This isn't it." Jung wasn't a therapist for calm times. He was a guide for inner collapse, for exactly the moment when the outer world no longer feels like enough. He didn't want you to be normal. He wanted you to be real. And to be real is to face your shadow, listen to your dreams, integrate your contradictions, and reclaim your soul. It's not a clean journey. It's not linear. And it won't fit into a neat, marketable slogan. But if you're willing to strip away the mask, to sit in the discomfort, to listen deeply, there is something waiting for you on the other side. Not perfection, but presence. Not image, but essence. Not performance, but freedom. And that freedom begins the moment you stop running and start remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. You've spent so long trying to survive in a world that rewards masks, hiding your pain, denying your truth, forgetting the parts of you that once felt alive. But something in you is waking up. And maybe watching this wasn't random. Maybe this was your soul knocking, asking you to stop running and start remembering. Jung didn't promise comfort. He didn't promise ease. He promised depth and truth. And he taught us something most of the world still refuses to hear. You will never be free by avoiding your darkness. You will only be free when you integrate it. When you reclaim the parts of yourself you were taught to fear. When you stop outsourcing your worth and return to your soul. That's the real journey, not perfection, but wholeness. And that journey begins, not with answers, but with honesty. So if this video stirred something in you, if a part of you recognized a forgotten truth, tell me in the comments. What part of this hit the hardest? What shadow are you, just a little bit, ready to face? Because when you name what was hidden, you begin to heal it. And when you bring your unconscious into the light, it loses its power over you. This is what Jung gave us, a map out of fragmentation, a path home. Because freedom doesn't come from escape, it comes from integration. If this message spoke to you, the next video will take you even deeper into this work. And trust me, your soul is ready. This is Psychology Insights, and the journey isn't over. It's only just begun.